All right, it is the top of the hour, or 1 minute past the time we were supposed to start, so I will go ahead and get started with today's webinar. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Best Practices for Managing Emails as Records from Receipt to Destruction. We appreciate everyone joining us today, and the first thing I'd like to do is just take a second and introduce our speakers. My name is Shayna Horka, and I am the Product Marketing Manager here at Gimmal. I'm joined by our key speakers today, Gimmal's Director of Sales Engineering, Dean Meisenheimer, and Repstor's Product Evangelist and Technical Consultant, Richard Barber. Now, before we get started, I have just a couple of housekeeping items to go through. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to submit them in the Q&A section on your screen, and we will answer as many as we have time for at the end of the presentation. There will be at least one poll question that you will see pop up, so please keep an eye out for that. And as always, if you have any technical difficulties, please let us know so we can assist you. To kick things off, we'll do just a brief introduction of both Gimmal and Repstor before we begin the presentation. I'll go ahead and get started to tell you a little bit about Gimmal and how we can help you take control of your information with our suite of solutions. Founded in 2002, Gimmal is a records, information management, and governance company that helps you balance the value your information provides with the risks it also presents. Whether you're trying to discover information in unstructured data sources, quickly respond to data requests, or comply with policies across multiple sources, Gimmal can help you achieve your information governance goals. We have a client success team and a global network of partners that deliver solutions in conjunction with key partners like Microsoft and SAP. Gimmal's family of software products work together to let you create an efficient digital workplace. Our comprehensive solutions include records management, content governance for SharePoint, document management for SAP solutions, and file analysis. I'll go ahead and hand it over to Dean now so he can speak a little bit more about what you can expect from today's presentation.
Thanks, Shayna. Yeah, as Shayna said, Gimmal's really focused around information governance. And essentially what that means is allowing you to take control of your information. Today, we're really focused around the records management aspect with email and our colleagues from Repstor. But, information governance is about getting visibility into the information that you have, right? Email is a massive piece of that. We all get, some of us get tens of emails a day, others get hundreds of emails a day. It depends on company you work for, corporate cultures, the infamous reply to all button. But, there's a lot of information coming in. And so being able to get visibility into that information is what information governance is all about. And by doing that, I can mitigate risk. If I know what I have and I'm storing it appropriately and I'm capturing the right metadata and properties about that information, now I can search for it. Now I can put the right retention around it. I can manage that information appropriately, and I can dispose of information when I should, so that I don't have information longer than I need to. And that increases efficiency, right? Both as a records manager, if I have a single records management view of the world where I can see all of my records, whether those records are emails in SharePoint, whether they are boxes on shelves somewhere, or whether they are electronic records in other repositories. I've got one view of the world, one way to deal with my records. And as you'll see when Richard speaks, increased efficiency for my end users to be able to get information, get emails into SharePoint. And then lastly is simply consistency. Ensuring I have consistency in how policy is applied to information, how information is brought in, and how metadata is captured. Gimmal Records Management is all about providing the records management policies in place on content where it's at rest. Today, we're focused on email and SharePoint and managing those as records in place in SharePoint. But it can also be done across other content repositories, and you kind of see a sampling there at the bottom of the screen. The idea is to have a central file plan where I can apply policy and retention across all of my records, regardless of where they may be or what they might be. And then I can search across those repositories and find all my records. So if I want to find all of my finance records or all of my employee records, whether it's an email, whether it's a folder full of paper sitting on a shelf, whether it is a document that was scanned in a PDF file somewhere. I can see everything. And then there's consistent life cycles and the application of legal holds as I need to. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Richard, let him tell you a little bit about Repstor and get into the challenges with emails.
Sure, thanks, Dean. So first of all, who are Repstor? We are a software company based actually within Northern Ireland. We have been operating since 2012. And
Richard, I'm going to interrupt you real quick. I think your slides have an automatic advance on them. Sorry about that. I'll be quiet again. I'll try and keep them timed for you. Sorry.
Don't worry. Oh. So we are Repstor. We were founded in 2012 from the UK, but we now operate within the US, and actually across our customer base, we have customers live within 25 countries. At Repstor, we develop information management software that allows our clients to exploit their investment in the Microsoft 365 platform, specifically SharePoint, allowing and focusing those users to leverage that platform for their email and document management needs. Today, as I said, we've got more than 250 customers across 25 countries, including North America, the United Kingdom and Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and further afield. We're really proud of our customer renewal rate. So we have 100% customer renewal across our customers, and that just speaks hopefully to how happy our customer base is. Moving then on into the next slide there, Dean, for me. Sorry. So what we have is we, first of all, want and recognize within our customer base that emails are not dead.
Sorry.
Emails, whether we like it or not, are still here to stay. We're currently in the times where we're seeing tools like Zoom and Microsoft Teams being hugely adopted to deal with real-time collaboration. But we're still not there. Microsoft are trying to give us stats on those various email statistics at the minute, but email has skyrocketed even more than the Teams adoption. Last year, we saw 128 billion emails being sent globally by business users per day. And really what we're seeing there is email is here to stay, but more than that, emails are records. So next slide for me, Dean. In that, what we're trying to deal with is among the documents that we're producing, among the documents that we're absolutely wanting to file and manage as records. Emails are a document of record in themselves. Those emails are documenting decision-making. They are documenting communication between client and organization. And what we see is more than 80% of the documents filed in those corporate management systems are actually emails, with the rest of them being 15% documents and then some workflow. In an organization, of 1,000 users, on average, we're seeing 1.1 million emails filed to your corporate management systems. Moving into my next slide. The benefit of then dealing with those emails as records is, first of all, we want those users to be searchable, reportable, and accessible. If we deal with a very common scenario of a simple leaver, a user leaves an organization and what we have is no more access to their emails. All important information between the client and the customer and the client and the organization is lost to anyone not CC'd within the email chain. We therefore have to make it really easy for that information to be captured. We want to make it really easy for those emails to be saved to SharePoint so that we can have effective collaboration, so that those emails can be searchable, that they can be accessible to the wider audience, but also that we want to be able to deal with those emails as information records. How can we actually apply governance to those and manage those in a case management or document management system? And that's where Repstor comes into play. Moving on to my next slide. What we're trying to do here is bridge that gap between a user's personal exchange or mailbox and SharePoint. We want to make it exceptionally easy for those users to do their day-to-day filing to that corporate management system without the hassle of user adoption and training issues. And that's where Repstor comes in. We are an Outlook add-in that brings that easy email filing activity to those backend repositories, be that SharePoint or be that some of the other repositories that Repstor supports, enabling then that collaboration, enabling those emails to be treated as records. And further to that then for the information managers in the audience there, allow those to be retained for appropriate lengths of time, appropriate compliance and governance applied with the Gimmal product stack. Now what I'm going to do, now that I've set some context, is actually jump into a live demo here. So I'm going to share my screen and just give you a flavor of how easy it is for Repstor to be used for that email management. I'm in my standard Outlook client here. What we do is bring that governance and enterprise content management system of SharePoint into the tools that users are living and breathing in. SharePoint is great, but we don't want users to jump out to other tools to allow you to file. So with that in mind, directly below my personal mailbox here on the left, we have a folder structure. And this folder structure is actually a presentation layer onto the areas within SharePoint that I have subscribed. How do we do that? First of all, Repstor allows for the organization to centrally manage the areas that each individual user or group has access to. And we can push out different areas of your SharePoint estate to different users that will then be presented for browsing within Outlook. For end users, they can also subscribe to content. So we have the ability to browse to a SharePoint location and simply through a browser extension, add this area site document library folder to our product within Outlook. Once within Outlook, we have a rich folder structure here where we can simply open a folder and we can see natively the content filed to SharePoint. These are emails that have been filed, but we're getting that familiar Outlook view. We can browse emails and get that preview pane. We can reply, we can forward in the same way that we might for our personal mailbox. We also have the ability to view documents and also then pull in other aspects of document management and SharePoint capabilities, such as presenting a document ID or a version number. Selecting one of those will, of course, also load that into the preview pane, so we can then use the document toolbar to edit, co-author, or view. Moving into some day-to-day activities, what we want is to make it easy for users to do the right thing, allowing that corporate filing. This is often the barrier to corporate management and centralized filing. We have an email that I want to file to a case or central area within SharePoint. How do we do that? It's a matter of simply either drag and dropping that into the appropriate folder and having our product simply synchronize that back to SharePoint. But we recognize users are going to be filing to different areas of your SharePoint and have a number of folders presented through your Outlook. With that in mind, we streamline the filing experience of emails simply by adding, first of all, into the right-click option, a quick file and quick file attachments, but also into your ribbon menu. Quick file opens a common dialog where we first of all will be able to search based on folder names or metadata configured. We're able to file to not only the areas subscribed to my Outlook, but actually all the areas that I have access to within SharePoint as required. We also have the ability to see my recent locations. So as I'm working on a particular area in the given day or week, I can simply select one of those locations and refile. perhaps more effective, we actually have a predictive filing engine. And what we have here is the ability on a user-by-user basis. Our system is actually analyzing the content of the areas I'm subscribed to. We're looking at those emails. We're looking at the information of that email, the to, the from, the recipients, the subject, the conversation thread, as well as the actual content of the email body and attachments. And then we provide rich suggestions as to where an email or document may be related to. I can select one of those suggestions now, and with a simple click, I can copy that from my personal mailbox to that central SharePoint area, and therefore those emails are visible no longer just to me in my personal mailbox, but to the wider team within SharePoint. You'll see that the email that I filed has been copied, but the original in my personal mailbox has been tagged as filed, and also where it's been filed to. What's really nice about this is if Dean and myself are filing and working on the same areas within SharePoint, receiving the same emails, I file an email to that area. The email that Dean is also CC'd on is updated as filed and where it's being filed to by myself, allowing that Dean no longer needs to attempt to do that filing activity. If we both file at the same time, there is of course duplicate detection, so only a single copy of the email is filed. Those email attachments are filed as part of that email of record so that we have the context of the email and the attachment at point of receiving. The emails filed, we can apply an exchange policy so that once it's been filed, after 90 days, 6 months, etc., that can automatically be deleted from my personal mailbox, but have that central area within SharePoint where the email is searchable, reportable, and managed. We can file those attachments as either new documents or new versions of existing documents to a SharePoint location as well. For our outbound emails, we make that really easy. I can simply email myself, draft an email as expected, and what we have then is the ability, first of all, to attach a document from one of those SharePoint locations, selecting the appropriate version, and even using components of Microsoft 365 like sharing links. Sharing links support emailing of documents and updating the security of that document to the recipients if your organization allows. In this use case, I'll simply attach a document as a physical document as an example. We now want to send this email, but of course we want to make it really easy for those users to file emails. So we have user adoption and all emails related to those cases and work filed to a central repository. When I click send, we then prompt, where would you like to file this? If it's an email unrelated to work, we can click send only. Otherwise, I have the ability to search either by folder and matter, or actually by search across my SharePoint estate for other areas that I haven't subscribed to my Outlook. I have the ability to select recent locations where I've been filing and working. And then we have those suggestions using my predictive filing engine as to where this email or document may be related to. We then have a send and tag option or a send and file option. Send and file sends that email off and files it to that central area within SharePoint behind the scenes. Send and tag takes that a step further and it tags the email such that any reply is automatically filed to the same location, automating some of that day-to-day filing activity so that we have all emails filed to that corporate and centralized SharePoint area. For attachments, we of course are monitoring the attachments that we send out in email, and we deal with those as in-flight versions. So if a recipient replies with an updated attachment, our predictive filing engine can actually flag that, saying that this looks like a new version of an existing document. With a single click, we can compare. With a further click, add that as a new version or a new document to that SharePoint area. We do, of course, deal with documents as well. So we are integrated into the wider set of products. So within Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, we can open documents. And that's open on my wrong screen. So we can open from and save to those SharePoint areas directly in Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. We're integrated into File Explorer as well, such that documents on my local computer can be filed. And also those folders I've subscribed to in Outlook, those SharePoint areas, are also surfaced through my Outlook. moving back to some of the filed emails, it's really important to point out here that we're not just filing the physical file. What we're actually doing is we're first of all filing that email, but we're extracting all of that really important metadata. So if I come down and just quickly view the properties here, you can see that we filed the email, but we've also tracked and saved metadata to that file within SharePoint. So there's the subject, the to, the from, the CC, the BCC, other information. And that's really important then for the governance and retention policies, where we can use not only the content of the email, but also the structured properties and metadata behind that email file. The last thing I just wanted to cover is, as well as having a rich Outlook-centric way of working for our desktop users, we of course are deeply integrated into the wider Outlook way of working. So be it Outlook for web, iOS or Android, you have the ability to quick file those emails from any client. Of course, on your mobile devices or Outlook for web, you get that same recent location and search capability. We have the ability to also send emails and of course attach documents directly from centralized SharePoint matters on the go. Thank you, and over to Dean to take you through the Gimmal record management features.
All right, thank you, Richard. Let me share my screen here real quick. There we go. And so, you know, Richard's working in legal. He's filing things into various locations for the legal department. I'm working in human resources. So I'm working in a different area in SharePoint, but same basic process, right? I have different locations mapped into my Outlook. I have human resources. I have a folder set up for my administrative documents. I have a folder set up for all of my correspondence to go into. And I have a sublocation for privileged correspondence, maybe information that goes to specific levels of individuals in the organization, VP and level and above, for example, or sensitive email, or whatever you want to, you know, however you want to define that. But that's kind of the structure that I have set up. And as Richard showed, I can quick file items, I can drag and drop items, I can bring attachments over. So I'm not going to show you everything Richard just showed you. That'd be a little redundant here in the demo. But what I am going to do is I'm going to pop into SharePoint, and we'll take a look at my SharePoint site. So here's my human resources site, modern site that I have set up, libraries for different types of employee documents, and here's my administration folder that we saw from Outlook. Well, here's my correspondence folder, and if when I click into that, I'll see that I have emails stored here. I have a document that was stored here. That could be an attachment that was brought in from Repstor. Could be a document that was uploaded through, directly through SharePoint. But my emails are here. And if I click on one of these emails, as Richard talked about, we have captured metadata out of the email and stored that as the properties on the item in SharePoint. So we have a content type set up called email. We're capturing things like the name of the email title, the subject, who it was sent to, if there was a CC or BCC field, when the email was sent, when the email was received, which will become important later, the conversation topic, and things like the importance, right? Another thing that we'll touch on a little later. And then, hey, if there's retention labels being applied in Office 365, we can those are being applied and captured as well. And what's happening is, whether this is a standard email, if it's a privileged email, it's getting put into this folder, and now maybe additional information is being captured. So now for my privileged email, it's been put in the privileged folder, and we can come down and see this one happens to be normal importance, but maybe one of them is marked as high importance. And you'll see a couple of things. Looks very similar, but you'll also notice the little arrows here. Those indicate emails that have been locked in SharePoint. SharePoint's native locking has been triggered to prevent these emails now from being either edited or deleted, and that was done in the background by Gimmal Records Management based on our retention policies. So let's go take a look at Gimmal. This is the main dashboard for Gimmal Records Management. You see three nice blue pie charts across the screen. And what these are showing me are, on the left, the various content sources that Gimmal is managing records in. We talked about that during the slides. We're really focused on SharePoint Online today. That's where our emails are being stored, that's where our attachments are being stored, and that's our focus for today. Other repositories can be managed as well. And what's happening is, as new emails are captured into SharePoint Online, Gimmal Records Management is seeing those. It's monitoring the sites and the libraries, and it's capturing properties off of those emails and going through an automated classification process. So we'll automatically classify the email and assign it to the appropriate record classification. And that's what the center pie chart shows, is just my most commonly used record classes out of my file plan. On the center of the screen, we can see I have some records that have recently been captured from SharePoint Online. If I hover over the link in the very bottom left part of the screen, you can see there's a link to where that email is actually stored in my administration correspondence folder in my HR site. The email stays in SharePoint. Policy is placed on that email from Gimmal Records Management based on the classification rules and the properties of the email. So we can see my record class that was assigned was COR02 General Correspondence. Here's the date the record was captured. If I want to see more information about the record, I just click the three dots, and now I can see here's the record class, here's the title, here's a unique identifier that Gimmal assigned to the record. It's an electronic record. Here's that path to where the record is stored. It's not moved. And here's the life cycle that was automatically inherited based on the record classification. So this classification has happened automatically based on Richard or I moving an email into SharePoint, the properties being captured, and Gimmal classifying and indexing that in the background. For my other email, you'll notice it was put into my privileged correspondence record class. So it gets treated a little bit differently. Why did it get classified there? Because of the properties. Well, if we take a look at the record details for this guy, we can see that similar information being shown, but now because it's a privileged correspondence record classification, it has a different life cycle associated to it. It actually has a life cycle that has alternate first phases. If it's a normal email, we don't do anything special. If it's of a high importance email, back to that importance flag that can be set in Outlook on an email. If the email was marked as high importance, we're going to declare it a record, meaning we're going to lock it automatically in SharePoint. So it can't be edited, can't be deleted. Once phase one is complete, we go to phase two, and it doesn't matter when it was moved into Outlook or when it was locked. From the date received of the email, we're going to keep it for 15 years, then we're going to do an automated dispose and delete. Okay? So how that all gets set up and managed is through the file plan menu and through the manage screen. So what I have the ability to do is to come in and see all of my records and view them by the record classes if I need to. So I can come in here, look at my file plan. I can come down to my corporate records. I can view my correspondence. And here you see my two record classes for my different types of correspondence, my general and my privileged. If I want to see all of the records in that record class, I can come in here and just click on it. And now I can see there are 6 records assigned to this record class. Here's a link to where each one of these records are. You'll notice if a record has been declared or locked, the little lock will appear next to it in the user interface. If the record has been assigned to a legal hold, I'll see the little gavel next to it so that I can see that it's been put on hold. The way we're managing this in the background is simply we're coming in and we're capturing the properties that Repstor is writing into SharePoint. So here you can see, we know Gimmal Records Management has captured from that email in SharePoint the created date, the file name, the folder it's located in, the O365 retention label. We know it's in SharePoint Online. We know where in SharePoint Online it is. We know that it's in the Human Resources site. We know the path to where that record is, And now all of that metadata that Repstor has populated for us and captured, we have all of that information available to us. So now we can do things like use the date received to trigger the retention. We can use the importance to decide whether or not the record needs to be declared and locked. Right? We can use all of this different information to control how our record is managed in SharePoint. This all gets set up and managed, or I'm sorry, real quick in the background here, my legal cases I mentioned. If I want to set up and manage legal cases, I can do that as well. So I can add my emails to a legal hold. I can actually have rules set up on my legal hold to automatically add records to that as well. And so if we pop into the file plan screen, one of the questions that popped up in the chat window was, what's a file plan? And this is kind of your retention schedule and how your records will be classified. I have things organized into what we call a big bucket, meaning I have large buckets for my different general corporate functions. If I expand that out, I see my different, in this example, corporate functions. And if I expand out correspondence, I can have subclasses for my different types of correspondence that I may have. So you can see that the user interface is very visual in nature. I can see, I can quickly see what I have out there. I can organize things however I need to. And if I can expand things down, the little triangles quickly tell me that. Secondly, the little gears indicate, do I have life cycles associated to a record class? Well, yeah, for 2-1, I have correspondence for 4 years. For 2-2, I have correspondence privileged for 15 years. And so my record classes get set up with different rules around how the record should be managed, right? I have a life cycle assigned, I have classification rules set up, and I have archive. I'm keeping my correspondence for 4 years. I do have the ability to lock the records if I need to, and they're not vital. If I want to see how the records are automatically being classified, because what you saw is whether I drag and drop the email in or Richard brings the email in, that record classification happened automatically. Nobody needed to assign a record class code. Nobody needed to put it into a certain folder for a certain record class. That's all driven in the background by my classification rules. So your records managers, your compliance team, can set up rules in Gimmal Records Manager that says, if it's in SharePoint and the path to that record, in this example, is administration correspondence, and it's in a folder called correspondence, I want it assigned to this record class. But for my privileged correspondence, we're looking at it a little differently. If it's in SharePoint Online and the path happens to be correspondence/privileged, right? And you'll notice we're using wildcards so that I could have this same, whoops, I accidentally deleted part of that. We could use that same structure in all of our SharePoint sites. So if it's administration library, correspondence folder privileged, assign it to the privileged correspondence. And then I can come in, I can select from my list of available life cycles, apply the retention, and now my records are classified and being managed. And my life cycles are all set up through the same user interface. Right? So again, I can leverage and take advantage of all of the properties that Repstor is providing me to trigger not just how the records are classified, but also how those records are retained. So here's my 4-year life cycle for my general correspondence. It's a simple life cycle. If we open it up and look at it here, there we go. We're looking at the date received field, right? Keep in mind, I may receive an email, but if I'm on vacation for a few days, or maybe it slips by, gets lost in my inbox, I may not file it for a week or 2 weeks, right? Shouldn't do that, but sometimes it happens. Well, we don't trigger retention based on the date it was filed into SharePoint and added to SharePoint. We can look at that date received metadata value that was captured and actually trigger the retention based on the real date received of the email or any of those other properties. So you can create your own life cycles with the triggers that you need, the retention periods that you need, and then whatever action you would like to take at the end of the record lifecycle. So in this example, look at the date received of the email, wait 4 years, and at the end of 4 years, automatically dispose and delete of that email. For my privileged emails, slightly different. Phase 1 is, we'll look and see if it's of high importance first. And if it is, give somebody a day to evaluate it. And if they don't change it, mark it, declare it a record, meaning lock it down. If it's a normal email, don't do anything, just go to phase 2. And now look at that date received, keep it for 15 years because it's privileged email, and then do a dispose and delete. So you can configure any types of life cycles in Gimmal Records Management, whether they are date-based, rule-based, evaluating metadata properties as you saw, or whether they are event-based, employee terminations, asset retirements, any type of retention where you can't pre-predict the start date. And lastly, and then we'll get into the Q of A, or Q&A, excuse me, is eventually records reach the end of their life cycle, as you saw. We're keeping records 4 years, we're keeping records 15 years, depending on what they are. Well, Gimmal Records Management provides a central inbox where I can see all of my records that are now reached a state in their life cycle where they need approval for an action. And most of the time that action is dispose and delete. Right? So if I have emails and I want to come in and manage the retention on my emails, well, first I've got a couple of pages of things here. Maybe I want to filter the view of my inbox and narrow it down to just a few items. Well, now I can see that I've got, here's a record in SharePoint Online, here's another record in SharePoint Online. If I want to approve the destruction and disposition of this record from SharePoint Online, and this happens to be an email, so if we were to look at the record details here on this record, you'll see it's a .msg file that was stored into SharePoint via Repstor. It has a life cycle that puts it eligible for disposition. And so now if I want to dispose of that record from SharePoint, I just click on the pull down, I click approve and submit, I say put in a comment if I choose, and I confirm that. The record disappears from my inbox. Gimmal Records Management reaches into SharePoint Online, destroys the record, bypassing the recycle bin in this example, and then writes an entry into the record archive about when this record was destroyed, who approved it, how it was destroyed, and then creates a destruction certificate for the record that was destroyed. So we now have a defensible audit trail of everything that happened through the life cycle of this record up to its destruction and how they were destroyed, or why they were destroyed and who approved it. Okay, so that's all I'm going to touch on today. We didn't want to do a full Gimmal Records Management demo. We wanted to kind of keep it focused around the email use case. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing here, and we'll go back to the slides. And we'll open it up for the poll. So Shana, I will flip it back to you for the poll question and then to manage the Q&A.
Sure, thanks, Dean. We have a lot of Q&A right now. I believe as attendees, you can see the ones that were already answered. We'll go over the unanswered ones live. We're going to start out with a poll like Dean said. It should show on his slides once we get them up. We did a brief demo of both Repstor and Gimmal's products. If you would like to receive a personalized demo of either one of these or both of them, just let us know in the poll and we'll reach out. Otherwise, there's a no thank you option. Once this poll goes through, we'll go ahead and get started on the Q&A section.
Sorry, Dean stopped sharing when he finished the demo. My mistake. You should see the slides again now.
Yep, looks good.
Yeah, lots of great questions came through. I could see them in the chat panel as I was going through the demo. So we'll get to as many of those as we can. But take a minute and click on the poll, and then we'll move on with the Q&A.
And it looks like we have questions in the chat as well as the Q&A. So I'll go ahead and get started in the chat questions while everyone's answering the poll. So Richard and Dean, if you're ready, I'll go ahead and start these. So the first one, is the thinking correct that when you move the email into a folder, the system is essentially making a copy of the email record into SharePoint? When you do this, is all of the original metadata from the email retained?
Great question. So absolutely. So there's a bit of configuration options there. We can actually move the email from your personal mailbox. If you're wanting that mailbox, maybe you have limitation sizes on your personal mailboxes, but typically our customers are copying that as a MSG or EML file into your SharePoint. Alongside filing a copy of that physical email, we are extracting all the metadata and associating that with the file, therefore assisting first of all with searching by the metadata, the to, the from, the CC, the subject, etc., as well as allowing that metadata to be used to drive those retention policies. So we can take a copy of that email or move it, but all the metadata is of course retained.
Great, and this is a great question. How do you handle employees declaring trivial emails as high importance, as frequently happens? Maybe an unimportant email.
Sure. I suppose what we're trying to do here is rather than combat those emails being sent with various tags and metadata, we're trying to make it easy for those to be filed into that corporate system. So of course we can, hopefully because those emails are being filed, having some accountability, that those are then going to be visible by other people. But Repstor at least are not doing any additional sanity around the flags such as importance or urgency.
Yeah, I will say, I'll add one thing to that, Richard. You know, once the emails are filed and they get classified as records, you would have the ability to generate a report, for example, that says, let me see all of the new records added to the privileged email record class in the last 30 days. So you could kind of do spot checks and see what's going in there and see if you do have an issue with kind of trivial content being misclassified. And you can either override the classification as a records manager, you know, and put it up for a more rapid retention and disposition if you want to. Sure. So it does give you some visibility that way.
Great, so moving on to the Q&A. Again, there are some answered questions. You should be able to see the answered questions as an attendee, but we'll go ahead and get started on the unanswered. So does this work in other email clients besides SharePoint, like Gmail?
So we have the ability to actually integrate with Outlook. So if you have connected other third-party email mailboxes, so be it Gmail or otherwise, you absolutely would be able to file those emails from any number of mailboxes to a central repository. That repository, so we've talked about SharePoint today, but much like Gimmal, we support a number of content systems. So we support the filing of emails from Outlook to Box, to Dropbox, to content management systems like HP Content Manager, iManage, SharePoint, HiQ, etc. So we are about, from Outlook as the primary email client, the ability to do that filing. We do also have the ability to support other email clients on mobile devices where we can map personal mailbox folders, so a folder within your mailbox, to a centralized area.
Great, and the next one seems to be coming up a lot in our Q&A. Isn't this duplicating the files in email and SharePoint?
Good question. So In theory, it is, but what we are trying to combat here is if you think of your personal mailbox as private and inaccessible to your wider organization and enterprise, whereas SharePoint is the record management system of choice. So that allows for those files to be accessed and collaborated on, reported on, etc. It's also very typical that emails within your personal mailbox will have a shelf life. So organizations typically have a email retention policy. So after 6 months, after 1 year, that email is deleted. Whereas within your central management and document management system in SharePoint, those emails can exist for far longer, 3 years, 6 years, etc.
Great. The next one is, can you talk a little bit more about predictive filing?
We absolutely can. So as I said, that predictive filing is not analyzing all the content in the system. We recognize within any organization and any industry, there's lots of similar work across clients and customers. So on a user by user basis, we are analyzing the content that that user has subscribed into their Outlook. So I'm working on a number of areas in SharePoint. Our tool set is actually using textual analysis. It's using word frequency models. It's looking at the content of that email or document. It's also looking at really structured properties in your emails, such as recipient. It's looking at those domains of the email addresses. And then based on frequency and probability, we then provide suggestions. And the more content that that user is therefore working on, the more accurate those suggestions.
Great. Next one, we have a shared drive where we file everything. What is the process to convert those files into SharePoint?
That's a really common question. So many of our organizations have started with those file shares. We actually, through the Repstor toolset, much like in my Outlook demo, where I was presenting SharePoint areas through our Outlook experience, we also can connect those file share and shared folders through our product. That therefore means that first of all, users would be able to access potentially the new world in SharePoint alongside the old content within your file shares without doing a migration. Our product, however, can also support bulk migration of content through a simple drag and drop interface or import process. Because our product, and I actually didn't mention, is actually offline first or offline by default, we have the ability to file large volumes of content, be it 100 emails, be it 10,000 emails, be it 10,000 documents, and that will be processed in the background and uploaded to that central area within SharePoint.
Yeah, and the other thing I would add to that is, we've seen a lot of clients, they can have terabytes of file shares out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so, high value content that adds value to the organization, that is active in business processes or whatever it may be, that's the content that people want to spend the time and the money to migrate in, to SharePoint Online or other locations. The lower value content, you can leave it on the file share and let Gimmal Records Management put policy on it on the file share. Right, so they can be managed as records while they're still sitting on the file share, so that you don't have to put effort into migrating content that you just need to let it live out its life and be disposed of in a proper fashion. Right, you don't have to undergo that effort. So there's a lot of options there into how to deal with that.
Great. There are a couple of questions around cost and implementation. That's really going to depend on your situation. So we'll be happy to follow up, Gimmal and Repstor, on the details of that. The next question is, what are the capacity limitations?
So I suppose in the world of SharePoint, if you're a SharePoint on-premise user, that will of course be dependent on the storage of your organization. For Microsoft 365, again, Repstor isn't securing or storing that content. We're leveraging that SharePoint Online. With that, depending on the number of users your organization has, you will have a number of storage limits. I think it's 1 gigabyte per user. Licensed user you get access to, and then further storage can be purchased. From a actual file size limitation within the world of SharePoint, I think that's the file size limit is 15 gigs.
Yeah, I'd concur. I mean, we have, again, Gimmal Records Management is moving your records out of SharePoint. We're managing them in place. So you're just subject to any limitations placed on you by the Microsoft 365 platform. And the scalability there has become massive. They publish it online, so you can find kind of the specs of any limits they do have. But any constraints you may have been used to with other systems or older SharePoint on-prem have pretty much gone away, I would say.
Okay. Next one is, can the software locate a file by a single keyword?
So one of the areas that I didn't cover off is we are integrated into the Outlook way of working, such that that Outlook search that we're really familiar with to search our personal mailbox can actually also search across the SharePoint areas that you have access to, either the areas presented through Outlook or actually leveraging that SharePoint enterprise search capability. So absolutely, you could type a particular keyword or metadata field as required through our product in Outlook, and that will return you the appropriate results, be it emails, attachments, or documents stored in SharePoint.
Yeah, and Gimmal Records Management provides an enterprise search capability. So if you're managing records in SharePoint Online, if you if you do have stuff on the file shares or maybe in other kind of legacy content management systems where you're managing records, we can provide an integrated search that will give you both property-based and full-text search across any repository that Gimmal Records Management is connected to.
Okay, and the next couple questions are both around retention, so for time purposes, I'll ask them together. The first one is, are you saying that people can pick their own retention period? And then can you further explain how event-based retention rules are set up?
Sure. So the good news is your general user population isn't getting to pick the retention period. That's controlled by your records management team and your compliance team in how they configure Gimmal Records Management. So, as an Outlook user, if I file an email into SharePoint Online, it's going to get stored into a library in a folder. Those properties will be captured. And then however your records management team has set up your file plan, has set up the classification rules, that will automatically drive how the record gets classified. The user doesn't need to pick a record class code, or the user doesn't need to select the proper retention lifecycle, because that's not their job, and they don't always understand your file plans. And that's been one of the downfalls of kind of legacy records management is when you force the users to pick record classifications, they quickly figure out ways to bypass the system. So your records team can kind of drive that in the background, and the retention lifecycle is just associated to the record class. Event-based retention is a retention where I can't pre-predict when I need to begin the retention. So a common example of that is an employee termination, right? I don't know when Shana will win the Texas lottery, but when she does, she's going to retire.
I hope.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that she'll retire. And at that point, we need to terminate Shana and begin the retention of her employee files, right? We may need to keep them for 7 years or 10 years or whatever, whatever the regulations are in your locale. But I can't predict when that's going to happen, but when it does, that's when I need to start retention. So that's an example of event-based retention. Retirement of assets is another one. When I take, let's say, a factory offline, or I retire, I had a client that leased aircraft. When they retired a specific aircraft tail number, that's when they needed to begin retention of all the records for that specific aircraft. So I hope that helps.
Right, and there are some questions, I guess a bit of confusion about Gimmal and Repstor's partnership. So I'm going to ask this one, hopefully we can clarify that. Please clarify the relationship between Gimmal and Repstor. Is Repstor a plugin to Gimmal, or does it operate independently?
A little of both. So we have a close partnership. Gimmal has the ability to resell some Repstor products. Repstor has a broad suite of products. Gimmal resells some that are specific to kind of helping drive our records management. But there's a number of clients we've worked together where we work together in, and that's why we're doing webinars together as well. So we've had a long-standing relationship, the two companies.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the next one is, what happens to metadata if an email is added to SharePoint directly and bypassing Repstor?
So that's one of the, I suppose, the problems with SharePoint is, if you are dragging and dropping an email into the SharePoint interface, it will only store the file. It will not have any of that underlying metadata stored against it within SharePoint. So that's where we step in, and actually, first of all, we would like to hope that our experience being so deeply integrated into Outlook allows for an easier use case of filing, but also we are doing that extraction of the metadata and storing it against the file in SharePoint. If you just simply drag and drop an email into SharePoint, it would just simply be a file. Of course, we do have the ability to identify that and then retrospectively apply the metadata, but that is an additional activity.
Yeah, that's one of the challenges with the modern experience in SharePoint is it just lets you upload files or drag and drop files in, and it's up to the user to go back and add that metadata later, which is always dangerous. I've been doing this 20 years. I don't like to go back and add metadata. So.
All right. Is it possible to ask more than one person to approve the disposal?
Yes, it is. So in your file plan configuration, you can set up approvers, which can be individual users or groups of users. And that can be a serial flow where, Richard and I may be the first level approvers. And as long as either one of us approve it, it then goes to Shana. She's the final approver. And when it's approved, the disposition then happens.
So if there is a large volume of email records with long retention, are there options for transferring records to an ECM or other longer term repository?
Yeah, I mean, transfers, Gimmal Records Management can initiate formal transfers, where that needs to be kind of driven by the record lifecycle. And we see that most often with things like state archives or federal archives. But to trigger a transfer from one repository to another, there are a number of ways I think that could be accomplished. Richard, I don't know if there's anything specific on the Repstor side that would assist there.
I suppose, it depends what those ECMs are. So we absolutely, as I said, we've talked about SharePoint today, but much like Gimmal, we support a number of other document and enterprise content management systems. So Meridio, iManage, Box, etc. So, it depends what that is. We could present our Outlook integration and filing of emails and documents to that other ECM of choice instead of SharePoint.
Great, so we have a couple minutes left. I want to be respectful of time, so we'll ask a couple more before we wrap up. The next one is, how do you control access and security to confidential information? Are the restrictions by password or user access rights?
So I suppose from the Repstor side, just to point out, we are not securing your content. So we are simply a presentation layer onto that back end system, so be it a SharePoint or otherwise. So through our product, you will be prompted to log in to your Microsoft 365 using appropriate organization credentials and two-factor authentication, etc. And we are authenticating as that user. So through our product, they will be able to access locations within SharePoint they have access to and file and edit content they have access to.
Yeah, and from a records management standpoint, the kind of the similar answer, the records are staying in SharePoint or the appropriate repository. The repository is managing access to the file itself, so the ability to view the file or do other things. As a records manager, I may be able to see records. I may be able to approve disposition of records. I may not have the authority to actually click the link and view the content of that record. right? So that that continues to be controlled by the repository the record is stored in.
Great. So we've reached the top of the hour. If there were one or two more questions, I would sneak them in, but there are a number of questions still left. We'll go ahead and answer these via email to the attendees that ask them. Don't want to leave you hanging on that. If you can think of any more questions that you didn't already ask in the Q&A section, here's our contact information. Our email addresses were on the last slide. You can email any one of us directly, or you can email info@gimmal.com or contact@repstor.com for more targeted questions you may have. A number of people asked about the webinar recording. Yes, we will be sending this out between 24 to 48 hours via a thank you email. So when you receive that thank you email, keep an eye out. The recording will be located within that. The next webinar that Gimmal and Repstor are hosting together in this series will be on September 23rd, and we'll be speaking about best practices for managing cases in Microsoft 365 as records, how to stay in compliance. We hope to see everyone there again at that time. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.